We've been playing a lot more of the War Within Alpha recently, and we are still having a lot of fun. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about Death Knights, and all 3 specs of Death Knights and all their hero specs as well. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, just as kind of a disclaimer that I like to do before any of these previews, I think it's always important to talk about how the classes feel, more than the numbers. Damage tuning is always the last thing that gets balanced and finalized before release, but really design is the most important thing to focus on here. It's the feel, how it feels to play the class. As for kind of the takeaway on Blood just coming into the War Within Alpha, it is the strongest tank in Raid right now in Dragonflight. It's very strong, and it is kind of above average in Mythic Plus. Not amazing, not like a showstopper or anything, but you know, pretty good. So it's coming in with a pretty good baseline here. Now, there were some class changes that just rolled out this week, and I kind of want to take a look at the class tree because it's pretty significant what Blizzard has done. There have been some nerfs, there have been some pretty substantial buffs as well, and I think, as often happens in the WoW community, people really fixated on the nerfs and really didn't think about the buffs, and so I kind of want to look at both and, you know, give them both their fair shake. So first off, A-Bomb Limb has been redesigned. It no longer gives you resources, and that's true for all 3 specs of Death Knight. It no longer gives you Runic Empowerment, Runic Corruption if you're Frost or Unholy. It no longer gives you Bone Shield charges if you're Blood. So it's no longer a resource generator at all. It is literally just a damage, skill, and an AoE grip. This is good and bad. For one, you're not tied to needing it to resource generate, you know, it's not like crucial, but it also does mean that AoE pull starts are going to be a lot more difficult as Blood, and that is maybe something that Blizzard will need to reconsider with talents, kind of redesigning stuff. I'll kind of go ahead and skip to the end here, where they made a pretty significant overhaul to the state of Unholy and also to the class tree for Blood. And then at the end of the post, they said, we look forward to hearing your feedback on all these changes. And next, we are working on getting our planned Frost and Blood changes in. So Blood changes are coming. This isn't going to be the final class or spec tree for Blood. It's not going to be the final spec tree for Frost, but it is basically exactly as it is in Dragonflight right now. That's what the class tree, spec tree, looks like for Blood and for Frost right now. Okay, so let's look at these class tree changes. Obviously, I said that A-Bomb Limb has been nerfed. Additionally, Soul Reaper has been moved up into the tree into a much more accessible location. You probably will take Soul Reaper in every DK spec now, which is kind of weird to think about, like having to dedicate a keybind to it in Mythic Plus. Usually in situations where you would take Soul Reaper, you're dropping A-Bomb Limb to take it, pure single target raid fights, but if Soul Reaper's easily available, it does a lot of execute damage, and even if Mythic Plus is mostly about AoE, there's still plenty of situations where you can single target down a boss or a big named guy, and, you know, having an execute to do that is definitely really strong. So I think this is probably the biggest thing that was kind of overlooked for DKs in this class change. They get very easy access to Soul Reaper now, and it's really good. Additionally, all of the other Keystone passives have been reworked, redesigned. Empower Rune Weapon is gone. This is something that I think people have really been lamenting, the loss of resources from Empower Rune Weapon just completely being taken away if you're not Frost. I kind of think it's sort of a bittersweet thing, right? Like, it is definitely a loss of resources. That's not deniable, but it is a loss of another cluttered keybind. It is a keybind that you would fire on cooldown with A-Bomb Limb in 99% of situations, and it was kind of boring, kind of was a wasteful resource waster, even though it also was a really good resource generator, so I'm okay with losing it. It gives you a lot more flexibility throughout the rest of the tree, not having to take that thing. Instead, Blood Draw has been made into a capstone, and as you can see, it's been redesigned a little bit. The basic design here is still the same. When you fall below 30% health, you suck up a bunch of health from nearby enemies, and that's on a 3-minute cooldown. But it has also been given a damage reduction component, 10% damage reduction, which is pretty interesting. And also it makes the cost of Death Strike 10 runic power lower. That only lasts for 8 seconds, so I don't really think this is all that amazing. I could see definitely this would be good for PvP. I do think this will be good for high-level Mythic Plus, and probably useful for some high-level raid situations, but, you know, it's not like super duper duper valuable. It certainly isn't Will of the Necropolis or anything. Like, it's kind of weird that this is the capstone over here, and then this is the much, much stronger passive over here that is kind of a couple steps up. Additionally, the passives that you take on the way to these 3 capstones are all kind of bleh for tanks. Runic protection, a tiny bit of crit chance reduction. Well, as a tank, you're guaranteed to not be crit, and as a DPS, 3% isn't enough to make it so that you're uncrittable by monsters. You would need 6%. So I don't really get what this is other than a PvP talent. 10% or 6% more armor. 10% armor wouldn't be great, but it's not even that much. It's 6%. So just a really, really like stinky passive over here. Subduing Grasp is kind of interesting. 8% damage reduction when you grip enemies in with A-Bomb Limb. I don't think that this is good enough for like Mythic Plus to compensate for the loss of Bone Shield, but it is kind of interesting, I guess. And then over here on the right-hand side, I think a much more interesting set of talents. Anti-Magic Shell being a 25% healing increase, basically like a mini Vamp Blood, is kind of cool. It's okay. And then you have this choice node down here at the bottom. A passive, magic damage taken is reduced by 10%, just all the time, and the duration of harmful magic effects against you are reduced by 35%. So there's really 2 ways this can work. This can either be something that works on boss abilities in raids, so like magic debuffs only last 2/3 as long as normal, which means that there might be situations, taunt swap, tank swap fights, where Blood DK can actually get resets without having to have a tank swap, without having to have a taunt swap. If that is the case, that means Blood would be able to solo stuff. I don't think Blizzard's going to let that go through, but there's a possibility that it might sneak through without anybody realizing, or might make some fights just substantially easier on a Blood DK than they would be on any other tank. Even just the 10% passive magic damage reduction is so much stronger than anything any other tank has, because Blood DK already is really, 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 really good at dealing with magic damage. It has anti-magic shell, it has Death Strike to agnostically heal. You know, they don't care what type of damage they're taking, right? They just heal back damage that they take regardless. So null magic is pretty crazy, and I think Blood DK is really positioning itself to be even stronger than it already was in raid situations. And Vestigial Shell is the alternative node here in this choice node, and it makes it so that when you press AMS, you give 2 nearby allies a lesser AMS that doesn't prevent the application of debuffs by the look of it, but it does give 50% reduced duration of harmful magic effects, and also just some magic damage reduction. So, you know, this could also be really useful in a lot of situations where maybe there are just too many dispels for a healer to keep up with. You can use this to alleviate some of that pain and actually get those debuffs off faster. Now, there were some other changes earlier up in the tree. Icebound Fortitude just has a baseline 2-minute cooldown now. Blinding Sleet is still right where it is. Runic Continuation, as you can see, has been moved way up in the tree. Anti-Magic Barrier has been kind of moved over. Icy Talons has been buffed and moved up. Unholy Bond has been buffed and moved up, and they are now like gate nodes. They are nodes that you want to take along the way to getting to the bottom of the tree. And this is why I say it's not as clear-cut as the class has just been nerfed. It's very clearly been buffed and nerfed, where some of the valuable stuff at the bottom of the tree, A-Bomb Limb is kind of taking a hit. Empower Rune Weapon is just straight up gone, but then very powerful 2-point nodes like Unholy Bond and Icy Talons are now 1-point nodes that are super easy to get. Soul Reaper, super easy to get. As you can see, very easy to get both Blinding Sleet and Asphyxiate on the way down the tree. Very easy to get Wraith Walk. There are tons and tons and tons of really powerful passives that you kind of had to skip in the service of getting all the capstones, getting all the way down to the bottom of the tree and getting those powerful nodes down there, that now you don't really have to do that. So if there is one big takeaway to be made here with the class tree changes, I think it's that DKs are going to be just fine. And if anything, I think this gives them a lot more freedom to pursue really good talents that were in the body of the tree. Now, moving on to spec changes, Frost and Blood haven't really gotten anything significant, Blood literally hasn't gotten anything at all. And, you know, they have promised that there is more to come there, and I believe them, but at least for the time being, the only thing to really comment on is Unholy. As for the Unholy changes, for the most part, they're pretty interesting. What they have done is, as you can see with talents like Ray's Abomination here, they've gotten rid of basically all of the cooldown reduction talents, and they have baked those in. So now, by default, Dark Transformation is a 45-second cooldown. By default, Army of the Dead is a 3-minute cooldown. Lots of stuff like that has been revisited and I think made a lot more convenient, a lot better for the class. Additionally, Sudden Doom has seen some pretty significant increases to its power. It now not only makes your next Death Coil cost no runic power, it's also a guaranteed crit. There's also Harbinger of Doom over here that replaces the old location of Sudden Doom that makes it trigger a lot more often and accumulate up to 2 charges and also increase that damage significantly. So there's a lot more of an emphasis on the old Sudden Doom playstyle, which was kind of my favorite part of old Unholy and something that had definitely gotten a lot weaker over time, and it's nice to see that get a pretty significant boost. All right, now let's take a look at the 3 hero specs that are available to Death Knights, and let's start with my favorite one. I think by far the coolest named hero spec in the entirety of the War Within. I think a favorite for a lot of people as well, Rider of the Apocalypse. No more point in delaying, let's go ahead and show off the best part of Rider of the Apocalypse. Check out this sick reskin for your ugly old Acarus Death Charger. This is it, Acarus. I'm pronouncing it both ways so that everyone's mad at me. The Acarus Death Charger here, as you can see, very ugly, very old, very low poly. Looks like it was made in 2007. And look at this bad boy, this beauty. So you have a choice node in the talent tree right here on the left-hand side. Very, very quick to get this. And you have 2 options. You can make it so that you are permanently able to ride this mount while in combat. I need to actually go find something to hit. Here we go. A innocent little critter. And as you can see, I am riding around on this mount, and it is not a problem. I can just ride around and fight and ride. This is so sick. I have absolutely loved this while doing leveling. It is awesome. But of course, you're not always going to be playing outside, and so in that case, you're able to take this talent Death Charge that replaces Death's Advance, and as you can see, now let's go back to looking at my ugly old crappy whatever it is, Death Charger. Very ugly. But check out what it's done to my Death's Advance. Boom. Death Charger, 100% move speed, all the same benefits that you would expect from Death's Advance. You know, you're not slowable, you can't be knocked back, any of that stuff. But also 100% move speed, absolutely zooming. So Blood DK's issues of being an immobile class, unfortunately, are going to stick around because Blood doesn't get access to this amazing, amazing tree. But for Frost and Unholy, I mean, the world is your oyster now. They're a mobile class. They have pretty easy access to Wraith Walk if you really need it, but 2 charges on Death Charge and being able to play Rider of the Apocalypse, being able to zip and zoom around all the time. I think the class is in really good shape for the 2 DPS specs playing Rider of the Apocalypse. Now, in terms of what it actually does, like numerically, thematically, you know, numbers are always a who knows kind of game. But thematically, what it does is when you spend runes, you have a chance to call forth a horseman. This is very similar if you watch the Monk preview video. This is pretty similar to the way that the conduit of the Celestials tree worked. As you can see, I've just called out High Inquisitor Whitemane. This just keeps popping some more diseases. Build them up, pop them off. See if we can get some more fellas coming out here to help out. The answer seems to be no. And this is maybe the biggest issue I had with this in testing is I didn't find that the proc rate was super duper duper high. But there is the final talent, Apocalypse Now. Great movie, great talent name, great talent design. When you pop your A-bomb, well, not your A-bomb, your Army of the Dead or your Frostworm's Fury, I'm hopeful that it'll work with Ray's A-bomb, which has a shorter cooldown, 90 seconds instead of 3 minutes. Let's check it out. Oh my God, look at that. What do you know? It summoned a whole team. Whole team coming through. It's all of the guys here to help out and do their thing. This is great. This is exactly what we're looking for. Now, you get a lot of benefits from the guys. Mograine will cast Death and Decay, and that'll follow you around. And as you can see, it gives you 5% increased damage and also lets you count his Death and Decay as your own Death and Decay. And I can't really show it off as well in hitting training dummies, but I have some footage from leveling and testing where when he is following you around with that Death and Decay, it's pretty large and it's like really, really distinct, really easy to see. So I appreciate that. Let's get my pet off of that training dummy there. There are some other things here, you know, as you kill guys, as you spend runes, you get more value out of the strength bonus from Nazgrim. you get more damage procs out of these bad boys, and that really is what it all boils down to. You get more damage procs, you get more damage out of everything. That's all good. You get some damage transferred over to your horsemen while they're active. You get some more runic power generation, just a lot of very basic stuff where this is a passive tree that increases your damage. And really this whole tree is about some passive damage bonuses, some passive bonuses to the class, all of which are pretty good. And then more importantly, getting that incredible movement speed from either Death's Advance being turned into a horse or just being able to ride a horse all the time while you're out in the world. All right, now I've popped over onto Frost and I'm going to show off the Deathbringer tree. Deathbringer is probably the most fun in combat to me of the three trees. Like, as much as I like the Rider of the Apocalypse's incredible mobility, and I like the whole theme of the class, I do think, you know, it's a little bit passive. I mean, it's very passive. And Deathbringer is anything but. Deathbringer gives you Reaper's Mark, which is a big hit. It's on a baseline 1 minute cooldown, but you can reduce that to 30 seconds with this talent here, Swift End. It also has a baseline 2 rune cost. You can cut that down to 1 with Swift End as well. All right, so let's actually show off what Reaper's Mark does, just to kind of talk about it a little bit before I cast it here. Basically, when you use Reaper's Mark on an enemy, it will blast them pretty hard with a hit, and it will then put a stacking debuff on them. And as you hit them with shadow frost damage, so shadow damage or frost damage or both, they will gain more and more stacks. When the debuff hits 40 stacks, it will explode, dealing a massive amount of damage, or if it times out, it'll explode, dealing a massive amount of damage. All right, so let's go ahead and show it off here. I'm going to go ahead and get some diseases and frost damage rolling on this target, and then hit it with Reaper's Mark. And as you can see, we're at 4 stacks, 5, and then it is very rapidly stacking as I hit it with more and more frost damage. And the goal here is to hit 40 before it ends, so it will do a big pop, and that is exactly what it did. There are some other damage procs, as you can see those scythes going off that you get from the final talent here, Exterminate. After it explodes, you get your next Obliterate to cost no runes, and Summon 2 Scythes to strike your enemies. If you're playing Blood, which is what this is also available for, then that will be, instead of Obliterate, it'll be Marrow Rend, but still the same mechanic. It'll do a bunch of damage. It has a chance to apply another Reaper's Mark, so there's a chance for that sort of cycle to keep going and keep going. And then it also does a bunch of AoE damage. There is this talent here, Painful Death, that I think is notable, certainly worth mentioning, because it's maybe the only time I've ever seen this in a World of Warcraft talent at all. It is the talent right here. As you can see, it makes it so that Reaper's Mark deals more damage. That's great. It also makes it so that Exterminate, the talent below it, is stronger. Makes it so that it empowers the second Obliterate and reduces the cost, and also like has a higher chance to apply Reaper's Mark. Again, this would apply to Marrow Rend if you're playing Blood. This is very weird though. To have a talent that you can take that applies to stuff below it is something I can't think of a time I've ever seen that. Very, very strange design. I do just generally prefer Swift End. The 30-second cooldown reduction and the rune cost reduction I think is much better. But Deathbringer, as I said, is available to Frost and Blood. I think that this is intended, generally speaking, to be more of a raid-focused talent setup for both Frost and Blood, with Rider of the Apocalypse being a Mythic Plus option for Unholy and Frost. I think that's generally the takeaway here. And as you can see, it's very single target damage focused, but there is some built-in AoE damage as well. There's also just like a bit of cooldown reduction on, what is this, Lichborn and Raised Dead. Okay, great. There's a bit of cooldown or a bit of damage reduction, bit of defensive value built into talents like Rune Carved Plates, where you're able to get a bit of just sort of random stacking magic and physical damage reduction. And, you know, I think that's pretty cool as well. But the main focus here really is on just kind of creating these 30-second burst damage windows where you apply your Reaper's Mark, then you blast, 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 and then you kind of wait for that cooldown to come back up. Now, I will say that as Blood, I have really, really, really enjoyed playing Deathbringer. I think it's been a lot more fun than Sand Lane in playing out in the world, but I don't necessarily think it's better. And now I'm going to talk about the third hero spec tree, Sand Lane. I have absolutely saved the best tree for last here. And let's just go ahead and get into what it does. Basically, Vampiric Strike is a talent that replaces your next Heart Strike or Scourge Strike. This is a tree for Blood and Unholy, and it occurs as a 10% chance to proc on casting Death Coil or Death Strike. So the sort of baseline understanding here is that you would be whacking away for a while, and then every now and then you would get a Vampiric Strike, and you press Vampiric Strike, it does some damage, and it gives you a buff. And that's cool, right? And so the buff is Essence of the Blood Queen. It gives you 1.5% haste per stack, and it stacks up to 7 times, and it lasts 20 seconds. And these aren't like Bear, Druid, Iron First stacks. This is a normal stacking buff that you can maintain. The issue with this, the real problem here, is that when you cast Vampiric Blood or Dark Transformation, depending on whether you're playing Blood or Unholy, all of your Heart Strikes, all of your Scourge Strikes are turned into those Vampiric Strikes. And so check this bad boy out. And so check this out. I am going to just sit here and yam on Heart Strike over and over again, and you can watch as my haste goes up and up and up and up. And while Vampiric Blood is active, the effect of that Essence of the Blood Queen is increased by 150%. So this makes Vampiric Blood into basically a heroism style buff. This is problematic. As we can see, we're getting not that close to it falling off. I got a refresh there in the middle from a proc. But if I hadn't gotten that proc, we might have gotten pretty close to losing that Essence of the Blood Queen buff. But that was at exactly the same time as Red Thirst was bringing Vamp Blood back off of cooldown. And so now here is the gameplay loop. You want to just be constantly blasting through your runic power as quickly as you can to get Vampiric Blood back off of cooldown, maintaining 100% uptime on Essence of the Blood Queen with ease, and spamming Heart Strike like there is no tomorrow. I let Bone Shield fall off because I was talking. So yeah, this is a problematic design to say the least. It's insanely strong, obviously. You're getting a permanent 10.5% haste buff. You're also getting an increase to Death Strike to the tune of 14% damage. That's great, right? This is all really strong. It's undeniably very, very strong. You're also getting a little bit of healing each time you cast it. You're also occasionally spawning these blood beasts that will explode for a bunch of damage. And undeniably super duper strong. You're able to maintain a permanent uptime on this, generally speaking, as Unholy as well, because Dark Transformation is now a 45-second cooldown, and you're able to get a lot of duration extension on those Dark Transformations just by using Death Coil. And so yeah, you're able to maintain 100% uptime on this buff. Certainly as Blood, and I think also as Unholy. I haven't spent much time testing in the post this week's changes of Unholy, but I was able to maintain it from Dark Transformation to Dark Transformation previously when it was a 1-minute cooldown, so I don't see why that would be a problem now. And it's very strong, undeniably so. I think this will be great for everything for Blood, frankly, and that really is the problem. In playing with this, in testing with this, this was undeniably, I'm about to get very animated here, this was undeniably the strongest tank in the game, no question. Absolutely the strongest tank in playing around out in the world, in playing around in dungeons. Not even remotely close. I played around with some like level 80 elites when I was level 73, and I was able to stand toe to toe with them for a while, and that's really, really ridiculous. There's also some really good utility in here, stuff like Blood-Soaked Ground, where you get more physical damage reduction if you're in Death and Decay, which you're always going to be doing that, so that's pretty good. There's also this weird interaction with Infliction of Sorrow, where it will deal a bunch of damage based on the remaining disease duration on an enemy, so you have this incentive to like be reapplying Blood Plague fairly often, or somewhat often. I mean, really, you're just going to be passively using Blood Boil to fill in empty globals just like you do now, but every now and then when you get a Blood or Vampiric Strike proc, you will just get a massive increase to the damage there because of that consuming Blood Plague. This is redesigned or functions differently when you have Gift of the Sand Lane active because you've used Vampiric Blood, where instead it will extend the duration of the diseases and then deal a smaller chunk of that damage to the enemy, but you're then able to build that up and build that up and build that up and then pop that once Vampiric Blood has fallen off and you hit the enemy with a Vampiric Strike while you're outside of that Vampiric Blood range. Very strange stuff. You also have this bonus right here, Visceral Regeneration, which gives you runes back when you use Heart Strike or Scourge Strike, and it is doubled when you use Vampiric Strike, and it is based on the number of stacks of Essence of the Blood Queen that you have, so it's a 21% chance to refund a rune normally with Heartstrike, and 42% when it's a Vampiric Strike, which is a pretty reasonably common occurrence. You get even just more power baked into Vampiric Blood. So what this has done is this has shifted that Season 3, Season 4 Shadowlands playstyle of popping Dancing Rune Weapon and then hitting Heartstrike like there's no tomorrow into Vampiric Blood. You pop Vampiric Blood and then you hit Heartstrike and Heartstrike and Heartstrike and Heartstrike. It's very strong, undeniably very strong. It's also very one-buttony. Is it really all that fun of a playstyle to experience? I suppose I should get a bone shield up going. You know, I don't know. I don't know that I find this really all that fun. Oh, I didn't get the 7 stacks. Well, you know, didn't set up right. Oh, but see, there we go. Beautiful little proc. Perfectly timed. Is it really all that fun to just be yamming on a single keybind? I think the Blood DK community answered with a resounding no in late Shadowlands, and I think unfortunately that's kind of what we're accelerating toward with Sand Lane in the War Within. With that being said, this is undeniably insanely strong. It's straight up broken, man. This is so much stronger than any other tank that exists in the game right now. You basically are getting a built-in Bloodlust every like 35 seconds, and you're maintaining about a third of a Bloodlust all the time, on top of all the stuff that Blood DK already has going for it. Incredible strength, incredible self-sustain, incredible control over your defenses that no other tank has anything even remotely approximating. So, you know, in the end, people like being strong, and there is nothing that makes you feel as strong as Sand Lane Blood DK does right now, at least in the tank department. So now I'm going to kind of give some closing thoughts. I think the biggest concern I have with the class redesign that they've just done for DK this week is that it didn't do anything to reduce the number of keybinds that you have. If anything, it increased them by adding Soul Reaper into the mix. And at least for Blood and Unholy, these were classes that were already laden with keybinds. They were flooded with keybinds. There are so many things to keybind on a Blood DK or an Unholy DK. And we know that they haven't really reduced that on Unholy because I've played around with it. It hasn't gone down. We don't know what's coming for Blood in terms of whether they will reduce the number of keybinds or not, but I have my doubts. So let's say you're playing Blood DK as it exists right now. If you're playing Sand Lane, you're not adding any keybinds in other than, I guess, Soul Reaper, which is also going to be alongside A-Bomb Limb. Okay, fine. Maybe there's a situation where, for some reason, you do need to take Rune Tap. That's an extra keybind you need to fit in. If you also want to play Deathbringer at the same time, which would make sense, this is some sort of raid fight where you really need damage reduction and you really need like some on-demand damage reduction and some on-demand burst damage, you're now having to fit in Rune Tap and Reaper's Mark. And then because they have removed Empower Rune Weapon, you probably want to fit in Blood Tap as well. So now you're having to fit in so many more keybinds in order to make Blood DK work right now. That is pretty concerning, considering that it has been one of the most complex and most keybind laden specs in the game throughout all of Dragonflight. To see that number, at least as it currently stands, go up and not be like reduced or ameliorated in any way, but actually increased, is very concerning. So in conclusion, as I've made it abundantly clear, I love Rider of the Apocalypse. I think it is super, super cool. I'm a big fan. I also really like the Deathbringer tree for both Blood and Frost. I thought it was really fun to play around with, and I do think it'll be really fun in raids. That 30-second burst damage cycle is extremely fun to play around with. For Unholy, I think Sand Lane is okay. It adds a lot of extra power onto Dark Transformation. It adds a lot of extra procs into a proc heavy rotation. I think that's okay. I think it's thematically consistent with what the class is. For Blood, I think it is insanely strong, but kind of problematic. You know, I think it's really going to feed into the worst urges of the Blood DK design that has been kind of respected for being very strong, but also disliked for being not very fun in the past. And I think we're heading right back toward that again. All right, so that is it for Death Knights thus far in the War Within Alpha. I think it's a pretty fun class. I definitely think it is on pace to be one of the stronger classes in the game in the coming expansion, but you know, we'll see when some more redesigns hit, and we'll have to go from there. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.